This is actually, thank you, Savya, for just for inviting me to do this. Uh, and it's lovely to actually be a part of a community who have whose interest is really to interact through books. You know, it's such an interesting thing to do, to have friends who are your friends because you're reading. So, so I think that is a really special feeling. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this community, if I may say so.
Oui, non, moi.
Uh, yeah. So, how do you normally do this? Do I kind of do a short say say a little bit about the book and then kind of open it
Yeah,
out for
open
various
it up for
reactions,
discussion,
or
and
yeah,
then give
is
pointers to
that the way?
important. Yeah, yeah, that way.
Yeah, okay.
Wonderful.
So on that note, for the first point that I'd like to make is, oh my God, what a book is this? It's so, it's a book which just sucks at your soul. You know, it's a book which is at once tender and violent. It's a book which seems to be about other people, but there's a strange way, you know, in which parts of the book could be your life, you know. So there's a kind of strange intersection between what's happening in the book and things that we have seen and experienced around us. Even as we read, we can see those um, uh, spaces where our lives and the book actually collide. And so the it's an astonishing book, astonishing. And for a debut novel, I think it's so assured, and the voice is so confident. It's there is a sense of being really, there's a sense of certainty about what Avni Doshi wants to say. And when you actually read around the book, you understand why. She has been with this book for 6 and 7 years. From her first draft to her final draft, she has taken years to kind of revise and polish and, uh, you know, edit it again and again. So that sense of intimacy with the book, it shows in the confidence with which the pages kind of turn, and you can see how powerful it is, and how strongly she writes. Yeah. If you kind of look at the blurb, and the thing which I said in the blurb, you know, spare gleaming sentences, spare elegant prose, a book which quietly, cleanly slices through the heart, beautifully grotesque, vivid, unexpected, compulsively readable, a novel, an elegy. So, uh, almost everyone, you know, wide variety of people, even the reviews that you read on around, talk about the elegance of her prose, her sentences which almost don't have a single word out of place, not an extra adjective, not a descriptive paragraph, you know. It is so, how can I say, it's so, it's kind of stripped down to bare bones, you know. It's so it's a book which is not padded up, which doesn't have extra, doesn't have anything extra to say. No layers and layers of words to simply, make the word count this thing. And because of that, I think there is something extraordinary which is going on in the book, because what it does is it just makes its point almost without any uh, with a certain exactitude, with precision. And I think those years of editing, have kind of uh, helped her arrive at this precision. It's not a precision which is untutored or something which is written just like that. It is not something which comes straight from the heart, but it is worked at. And I think that labor of writing is so evident, and it makes it so beautiful and so very powerful. So I think that's one thing that I would like to say. The second thing that I would like to talk about is uh, its deeply visual quality. I think her own background in the visual arts, in design, her has uh, has been an entry point into the way she has imagined and written this book. The fact that her protagonist is a visual artist, the fact that Avni Doshi is a curator. In some interviews, she has said that she has always been interested in the link between the visual arts and writing, and one of the shows that she curated was a show that was centered around Marquez's work and a set of artists who are responding to Marquez's uh, magic realism. And you can see how Marquez comes back to the book, as a part of a show that another curator in the book actually imagines. So that there are these kind of interlinkages which you can see. And so apart from the actual presence of a visual artist and curators and the Bombay art scene. Apart from that, I'd like to kind of point out to the kind of um, the visual quality of the visuality of the text itself, because if memory and identity are the the abiding questions that this book asks, her her engagement with memory is as much a visual as it is a verbal task. So not only is she writing the book, she is also drawing her memories. Drawing is a part of her memory, but drawing again and again and again is also particularly the image of this found picture, which is, as we find out in the end of the book, not a found picture. You can see that whole the neurotic repetition is something which is and the construction of identity through repetition is something which is very central to her narrative, which is actually lies at the very core of the book, if I may say. And which takes us then to the question of identity. And and I would like to leave you with this idea that the notion of identity is something which can only happen in and through doubleness, uh, which is you can have an identity only if you are seen again. So if you see someone for the first time, that person has no identity unless you remember that person or see that person again. So you need a doubleness in order for that identity to be constructed. So this relationship between mother and daughter is a kind of doubleness, you know. So the mother and daughter, they are same, they are different, but they're the same. Yeah. So so they are mirror images, but mirror images too are an image is not the real. So if they are mirror images of each other, then who is real in this book? And as we get to the end of this extraordinary book, we are really left wondering, who is real? What is truth? You know, we are left with these questions, right? So, and yeah, so that's another thing that I would like to uh, talk about, to lay for all of you to see if maybe you'll want to maybe pick up something, if that spoke to you in any way. Um, just two more points and I will quickly stop and maybe kind of enter again in and out. The other point that I would like to talk about is that uh, this book is clearly telling us the story of mother and daughter. Yeah, it's a story in which the mother and daughter's life is tied together.
Mm-hmm.
Is tied together with uh, both desire, dependence, hostility, violence, all of it. Yeah, there is love, but there is also hostility and hatred. You can't, in fact, unpack them. You can't separate them in this complicated relationship that the mother and daughter have. And you can see, but this is located, so this violence that actually characterizes the relationship between Tara and Antara is also seamlessly set in the increasing violence of an India in which their story is playing out. So their personal violence is intersects with the violence that we find in India. Take the figure of Reza Pine, for example. So the contours of his personhood, his self, cannot really be separated from the way he has looked at the violence of 1992 Bombay, right? And is how much of his selfhood, his brittle quality, the way he simply disappears into nothingness, you know, and yet a part and aspect of a Marathi Hindu family, you know, he is in that family and yet disappears from their world. How much of it is an allegory of what is happening in India, right?
Yes.
And so when you, And you can see through and through, there is a quiet account of the violent underbelly of our metropolitan lives. And this violence of our metropolitan life is one feels like asking, is this violence of our metropolitan lives, is it outside? Is the outside the only place where we find this violence? Or has it percolated into our innermost selves, our quietest, most intimate spaces? So this is a question that the book actually proposes, you know. And then, um last of all, how can one not talk about that extraordinary first sentence? Oh my God, look at this sentence. It's, you read it and your breath catches because it's so, what, it counters all uh, the simple knowledges that one has about a mother and a daughter. And I have to read this, so you will forgive me.
Just a little warning. It'll cut us off at 30 minutes, but you have to rejoin. 45 minutes, no? You'll have to rejoin because it's
Sure.
segments of 3, okay? 90 minutes. So,
Right.
yeah.
And it opens, I would be lying if I said my mother's misery has never given me pleasure. What an opening. Almost every reviewer has commented on it because it takes us aback. Undercore of hostility, which is acknowledged between mothers and daughters almost as if for the first time. And it really, you know, it's like an alter ego to the other famous first line in British literature, that is Jane Austen's famous first line in Pride and Prejudice, which talks about uh, looking for husbands, and the humor of that line, and it's the way it points out to a social lying out there, is stands in almost binary opposition to this inner landscape, this interior that this opening line starts, and it invites us into their inner life. Yeah. So I think what I'll do is really stop here and stop here with a question. And the question that I really have for all of you would be, what kind of story do you think it is? What kind of genre do you think this belongs to? So, is it a domestic novel about a mother and a daughter? Is it a psychological stream of consciousness novel? Is it a scientific novel? Is it a revenge narrative? And finally, is it a murder mystery? So I'll leave you with that question, and I'd love to hear what all of you have to say. Yeah.
You can just invite people to speak. Their
Yes.
names. Can you see everybody's names? Can you
Yeah.
open the gallery? Welcome, Margarida. Margarida is a professor from the University of Lisbon.
Thank you.
She's also joined us.
Hi.
Would you like to comment, Margarita? Maybe we can start with you.
Oh, I think maybe just give me a little time to reflect on everything that's been said first. I'm still I'm still thinking about this question that was asked. What kind of story is this? I'm also, while I was reading it, I was also reflecting on this, because it's actually very different from other novels that I've read. There is a lot of psychological drama, as you said, right, in it. I also think it's a very, very 21st century, although it's not set in the 21st century, it's very 21st century novel. And I was really curious about the differences in her narrative, in even grammatical differences, how she switches from in verb tenses. I thought this was very interesting. And also the detachment that I felt. And it's reflected in her writing, and it's a reflection of her relationships and everything about this. Well, I said I was going to wait, but I've just started talking. This is something that I felt from this novel. It's very detached, the feelings, the way she expresses it, and this is very well developed. The author, she did this very, very well. And on the whole issue of the ashram, and I had actually seen the documentary, which I'm sure you all know about, the Wild Wild Country documentary. I saw this last year, or at the beginning of this year, and I was really intrigued by the documentary, and so it was. And I did a bit of research through Indian novels to look for novels where this was represented, and I didn't find any. So when I started reading, I was quite, I was pleased, because finally I had found a novel where this reality was represented, because it sounds very much like the, what's Rajneesh, right? Sounds very much like Bhagwan.
Yeah, Rajneesh.
Yes, and the Mercedes, and his whole figure, and so I was quite intrigued by this as well. Finally, seeing this represented in an Indian English novel. I don't know. Maybe you know better than me. If there are other novels where this is talked about, these. But I wasn't able to find this, so this was the first time that I see this, and I thought it was quite very documentary-like as well. The whole description, I think it's from page 58, when she starts talking about the giant and the pyramids, that whole description. But it was very, very, very good description, very documentary-like. And I thought what you said about the engagement with memory, this is a very present issue in this book, and different things she says and different things she does, like those drawings she does from memory, right? Every day, that diary, every day she draws, she draws another representation from memory, right? I thought that was. Again, this play with memory, the representation of memory in the novel. So what kind of story is this? It's a difficult question.
Yeah, it's a difficult
question. I think it's a very good story. It made me think about a lot of things. Dementia, relationships between mothers and daughters. I don't know, it's very visual as well, as you said. It made me think about a lot of things, but I still am not able to put it into any category, okay? And I think I'll leave it someone else to continue from here. Thank you, Savia.
Welcome. After those two wonderful openings, I think, please, we are inviting responses from members.
Can you tell the name of that documentary again?
Wild Country.
Wild Wild Country.
It's on Netflix. It's about Osho.
Yes, yes, it's in many parts, right?
Yeah, it's a long documentary. It's
Yes.
very long,
Wild
and
Wild Country.
it's quite shocking.
Why is it shocking?
It's a documentary on it.
Well, it's shocking because it's, well, to me, I didn't know about any of the realities, anything that was going on besides his teachings, because I knew his books, and I knew some, I'd watched some of his talks on YouTube, but I didn't know anything about the ashram, and when they moved the ashram to the United States, and all the problems they got involved in, the legal issues and the criminal issues. And it's I don't know, it's very interesting. It's very revealing of I don't know to what point it's also biased, but it's worth watching. And here, and when I read these when I read about the ashram here, and the whole that scene, you know, with the arms in the air, and all the and Antara trying to call her mother's attention, and she was just overtaken in ecstasy. I thought it just took me straight to the documentary and some of the images of that.
But Osho was also, he had an ashram in Goa, actually.
In Pune.
So I know a lot about in Goa, in Kalanguta, I think, and there was an open theater, and people were dancing and chanting there a lot. So that's how I know about him.
Yeah, I think he had many all over the world, but this biggest one was in India. Was it in this where the book is?
Pune. It's where the novel is set. Yeah.
Okay. And then, okay, and then it was in the United States. Now I can't remember exactly where, but some in the middle of.
It was in California.
California. That's right.
California. Yeah. It was a whole town, actually. They set up a whole town. They founded a city.
Astrid, would you like to respond? Please. You have to unmute. Yeah.
Sorry. I think of another book when we talk about Osho and the ashram. I think of a book by Geeta Mehta called Karma Kola. Has anybody read it? Because Karma Kola, she also talks about ashrams and you know, with a very ironical depiction of the meeting between ashramites and people from the West and India, and Avni Doshi's style is very different, and yet I'm thinking I haven't read Karma Kola since the 80s, and maybe I need to have another look at the book again. I mean, this book, you know, I love the way she plays on, she uses the word plaque, about the plaque in your brain, and then suddenly she's talking about plaque on the door of her neighbors, and you know, she uses memory repetition. But I find this book painful to read because my mother had Alzheimer's, and seeing her slowly die piece by piece was a traumatic experience, and I went through that for 10 years, and so so I'm struggling with this book because it's painful, just like I struggled with M and the Big Home. You know, it's just some books are hard to read because they give you associations, but it's so well written. I enjoy the language, and I don't know how I would characterize it, what category I'd put it in. I can't give you a straight answer to that one. Thank you.
Norbert, please.
No, Savia, I
No,
read only.
if you address it to Dipta, please, Professor Dipta. You address everyone. Okay.
Yeah, Dipta, you'll have to excuse me on this. I read only half of the novel. I had some impressions of the novel, but for the half that I read, I wasn't too impressed with the storyline at the beginning. And yeah, but now that you gave us a narration, it's beginning to fall in place. But I did find the language excellent. I liked the language. And I think the whole story about the girl in white cotton is put in a few lines in page 56. If you let me read it.
It's the most famous commune in India today. 27 acres of lush parkland, shaded walks, and outdoor restaurants.
What's that?
More than 85,000 people a year.
Hello? Did something go wrong?
Yeah, there was some other voice coming through, but it's fine now. Please carry on.
Okay, no, I was referring to page 56 at the bottom of the page. I won't go to it because everybody has read it, but I think that gave me an idea of the whole thing, what this book was all about. So I don't have much to say. I would like to listen to people who have done a deeper study of the book. Thank you.
It's lovely, Margao, hein? Il a lu la moitié, mais il peut dire quelque chose. Il y a des choses.
Okay, I can throw something into this discussion by letting you know that the book in English, the book I was asked to translate and that was presented for the Booker Prize is called Burnt Sugar. So I'm wondering about this.
Yeah.
Why is it burnt sugar? Now to answer all this, so I put a question to everyone. And to answer that question, is it a domestic novel or is it a scientific novel or is it a revengeful novel? What is amazing about the book, according to me, is the structure of the book, because it plays on memory and it goes from past to present constantly. And from a memory, she tries to trace the sort of fluctuation, changes, permanent changes of her view on life, on her mother, her feelings to her mother, on her husband, and on her in-laws. She's constantly putting another touch to the drawing she's trying to set for us. And it is a kind of work in progress, a memory going from one souvenir to another one, and gradually the figures take shape. What really struck me also is the whole description, which is very hurting actually, of Alzheimer, because maybe I'll be Alzheimer soon, and like all of us, but maybe sooner. And that the way she describes by touches the changes of her feelings, starting from the very striking first sentence, then there are some emotional moments to her mother, and gradually there is that rejection and that disgust. All the descriptions of her mother falling asleep, dozing away, the way she describes the way she smiles or she laughs or she giggles for no reasons. And this is very precisely, very minutely sketched out. And that's very striking. And I have to listen to every variation, all that diversity as the translator. I cannot hear the same laughter, and I cannot choose the same words in that variety of feelings.
It's, I think there's something to what you're saying here in the sense that when you kind of read a novel as a translator, the way you reach the novel will not be quite the same as when you're reading as a reader, just a reader. So when you're reading as a translator, I feel that maybe there's a certain nuance which you'll be looking at, a certain engagement, a certain attention to words and structures of feeling which may be different from other types of reading, you know. So one of the things that I found that I felt with all of us have kind of talked about the question of memory, and but I think along with the question of memory, I think I would like to kind of emphasize the question of repetition, because which is kind of emphasized over and over again, you know, and the repetition of repetition, if you like, is, I think, really the underlying structure of the book. And I feel that we can get a clue or an entry point into this whole question of repetition in that curator's note about seriality. And seriality is something that she is doing again. It's almost a neurotic enterprise to draw that face over and over and over again for 365 days. And that becomes the body of the show, the exhibition. And the idea of repetition is also something that you find in Tara, Antara, Anika. You know, so and I think it's really this this high anxiety, the pitch of anxiety kind of is heightened towards the end of the book and the birth of the daughter. And that anxiety is something I feel which is almost a marker of that repetition. So somewhere there is a kind of blur between Antara no longer is an autonomous subject, an autonomous figure. She kind of blurs into her mother, and her mother blurs into the daughter, and both of them blur into the child. So there's no sense of distinction between their identities anymore. So each of them seem to be a kind of repetition of one another. They themselves are the seriality which she has kind of drawn. So, you know, of Reza, as we find out later. So I think the relationship between memory and repetition is something which powerfully structures the book, you know. And I feel that when the points that you've made, Simone, is some it resonates with this whole question of repetition, of seriality.
Preeti Araujo, Dr. Preeti.
Yeah, I think each one has given a different view, but I felt also, besides what has already been spoken, there was a sort of love-hate relationship between mother and daughter. They did love each other because whatever Tara could do for Antara, she did to the best of her ability. But unfortunately, she made Antara get such a traumatized childhood right from the time of the broken marriage, and then she went to the ashram, and at the age of 3 to be separated from your mother and then to see sex happening around you, you know, as a baby, to look at all that. And if that Kali Mata hadn't helped her, I mean, her childhood would have been even more traumatic. And then after that, begging on the road, and then the boarding school experience. I mean, the Antara had all the reasons to hate her mother for the trauma that she had undergone as a child. And she still came out of it. And I mean, she managed to have a normal marriage, which was something remarkable. At the same time, she kept hating her mother. She kept loving her mother. I mean, that was the strongest thing that I felt in that. And finally, it was like a competition between the mother and the child. Even the person who Antara really loved more than her husband was Reza. And that was actually her mother's lover. And the drawing that she did, the whole life of hers was drawing, artist. And she was just drawing that same face again and again and again. And the reason she hid it from her husband, I feel, was because actually she loved him. And the only person who recognized who that person was her mother. So again, there was a competition, and that's the reason for the hate, the hatred. So although she loved her, she was taking care of her, even when she burnt things that were so precious to her, which she knew she wouldn't get back, she still cared for her. She was feeding her with things that she thought she would improve. I mean, it was a more of a sort of a love-hate relationship than, the way it was described. That's what I felt.
Yeah. Did you feel that her mother is vengeful when she is setting up a relationship where she almost replaces Antara for Dilip, Antara's husband, towards the end of the novel?
Yes. Again, there was a competition. So
Yeah.
even the baby, Antara's baby, she wanted it. She called her Antara and she wanted. So there was all the time, there was a competition between the two. It was not like a mother-daughter relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the competition is always for men, no?
Yes. Most
Yeah.
of the time.
Yeah. So, you talked about how she fed her the things which would help her to improve, but when she starts getting fearful, she feeds her the very things that would poison her and perhaps kill her mother.
Because it was a love-hate relationship. And
Yeah.
I'm sure if she was going to die, she would go and take her to a doctor and try to save her. I mean, I
Yeah.
think the trauma of youth has carried on to her adult life. And so she's she doesn't know what she does. I mean, she wants to be good, but then the evil comes forth again. You know, the hurts from the childhood are very difficult to abolish.
Do you feel the mother is not hurtful even as Antara is an adult who has a household of her own and who's married and so on?
But doesn't she try to interfere in that marriage? Doesn't she try to interfere with the husband? So she's
Exactly.
interfering. She's all the time interfering.
Interfering, and she's always trying to belittle Antara, isn't it?
Right from the start, when she mentioned
Yeah.
to the servant about her bedwetting. I mean, why should you humiliate an adult? I mean, with something that was long forgotten. She's all the time, like, putting her down. So she was
Yeah.
jealous of her. In the heart of heart,
Yeah.
she was jealous. So there was
So,
always,
yeah.
Um,
True,
which
true.
well, very unusual. But of course, I mean, given the circumstances, what happened in her mother's life, I mean, the sequel came on to the daughter.
Yeah. But if you look at the opening sentence is set up almost as a universal, in the sense that it's like Jane Austen saying it's a truth universally known. It's in the same way, there's a sense in which the first sentence is stated like a timeless truth. So, kind of making us think about the kind of structures that surround us, What is it that make women compete with each other so much, all the time?
Always
You
men, most of the time. But one thing
Even
I
if it is,
you say, why murder mystery? You ended it by
sorry?
asking, you asked one of the ways to evaluate it whether it was a murder mystery. I didn't get the point. Why murder mystery?
Does anyone else think it could be a murder mystery?
No,
I didn't think so.
no,
No? None of
no,
you?
no, no. It was just a
No?
relationship. No.
that's a deeply
Yeah.
psychological novel.
Okay, how would you interpret? Um, this is, of course, at a stretch. I do agree that it is a stretch, but just as a way of thinking, the minute he realizes that her mother has her life in her hands by knowing the secret of Reza, and she is ready to deploy it against Antara by telling this story to Dilip. He moves away from a diet which is shorn of sugar, which works with ketones, and starts giving her biscuits, bread, putting spoons and spoons of sugar in her tea, so that her Alzheimer's actually
Aggravates.
gets
Aggravated, yeah.
worse and worse and worse, leading eventually to her death. So it is an attempt, therefore, to kill her mother, right?
But interestingly,
Yeah, I mean,
She couldn't.
vice versa. When you have that little party for the little one, and Tara said, "Do you love me?" And Dilip said, "Yes, I love you." And Antara is left out. And she, in fact, takes the place of Antara. Tara takes Antara's place, using, as it were, her mental state. And there is one moment where the mother and daughter look at each other, and Tara is clear-eyed, and mother and daughter know that she is play acting. So in that sense, she is also destroying her daughter's life And at that point, if you look at what Avni Doshi has said, she's right. Yes, in the MRI, there was no plaque. There was, her brain is young. So, in fact, there is no physical evidence of Alzheimer's in a scientific way, right? So then you look back at the narrative and then you start wondering all these things that the mother does under the name of Alzheimer. Does she have it? What if one actually reads the book assuming that it is Antara projecting Alzheimer on Tara, and perhaps Tara doesn't have Alzheimer at all? Then what happens to the book? Does the book change? It's a question. It's not. It's nothing certain about what
And interesting,
I'm saying.
the whole family buys that argument, because even her mother-in-law, she starts telling her, give Antara to me, you know, and she winks at the real Antara, you know. Instead of calling the baby Anika, she calls her Antara. And she says, give Antara to me. So the family buys that drama, you know.
Yes.
I also love the
and
way...
so it becomes an allegory of how it's almost as if her mother is saying, you tried to kill me, but I am going to kill you.
Yeah.
So
More of a
is it a
revenge.
revenge narrative? Is it a murder mystery? You know, these are ways. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm saying it's possible to read it that way.
And the revenge is like more in the form of an eraser. You know, she kind of... Much as she tries to posit Reza into a painting through through an erasure. This is also another way in which she uses the whole motif of erasure to kind of erase Antara from the entire narrative. I also love the way she uses clothing at several times. There's a point that she feels her mother Tara, Antara feels her mother Tara is losing her memory. She goes to her home and to get some things to stay over. And then she sees her braziers hanging and she says they're old, they're, you know, and she packs the whole lot up and gives it to her servant. But when she starts wearing her clothes, she's very critical. She talks of you know, flesh hanging here, flesh hanging there, and you know, she's always full of descriptions of her mother's body to show her as old, useless, sagging, without lovers. She's constantly making comparisons between how Reza loved her. Reza never introduced her to his friends, but he introduced Antara when they go into the forest for their drink and all. And she says, you know, so she's constantly making comparisons to show that she was higher in the relationship vis-a-vis her mother. Then, you know, also some interesting things which are shown are, for example, when they enter the ashram, and there is that entire scene that Margarita has so well described. And Antara is crying for her mother's love. She's holding on to her legs, but the mother is, you know, very busy with the leader of the monastery, and you know, she's kind of shooed away. Then she goes to the bathroom with Kali Mata, yes. And I can't, for the life of me, make out whether the little girl that is being that's cleaning the floors, that's you know, then raped or, you know, sexually abused by one of the inmates of the ashram is her. And she just mirrors that image, and then she shows her disappearance and then describes her own life. But there is that other thing also which is very unclear, but the imagery of that happening occurrence is very strong, and one wonders whether that's her experience in that triad, you know, where her
Yeah.
mother is there, she's there in the monastery, and the lover. Then there is that
Yeah.
other thing when they go to Goa. You know, there's a sandwich of three of them riding on the motorbike to Goa and going to Kandulim, and they sleep together on one bed. And that time she's a teenager, and it's probably the first time that Reza notices her. There's also those other descriptions of her coming on age and the kind of, uh, you know, the kind of very guarded distances and very guarded intimacies that are there in their relationship are shown very beautifully. And the third moment in the same type, but at a different level, is when the party is held, like Professor Acharya has told us.
Yeah.
And, you know, then Tara, you know, talks to Dilip, do you love me? You see, and he
Yeah.
says, of course we do. And, you know, these are very beautifully created to allow the narrative to grow in a particular direction.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite,
For someone so young, it's quite an explosive novel. Any other
it's quite
comments?
Savia,
remarkable.
ashram. Savia, how could she be raped in the ashram? She was there from age 3 to age 7. She
There is
couldn't
a
have been
clear
raped there.
uh, there's a clear description of a child who's clearing the
Yeah, but
floors.
there's another girl, a servant girl who was there cleaning and sweeping.
Yes.
But how
Yes.
a 7-year-old girl, and then it's not mentioned anything after that. I mean, that kind of trauma was not experienced after that.
Yeah.
I don't think, at least I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong.
What
No,
did you think?
I think her first experience with sexuality is with someone in the set of flats when she's about 13. But she does remember this girl who's raped, but she remarks that no one talks about her, and her name is erased in the memory of that ashram. So yeah, so but but certainly there is a certain experience of sexuality which is clearly not normal for a very young girl as she was within the ashram. That is quite clear. Yeah. Uh,
We still have about 20 minutes or
yeah.
15 minutes of the podcast.
Yeah, along with what Savia was saying about clothes, there's also a lot on smells, right? There's a lot of reference to different smells, even bodily smells as well. And I think this is something else that I quite liked about the novel. But this is also very common in Indian novels, isn't it? Indian English, well, the flavors and the smells. And in this novel, I think it's very, it comes out quite a lot. And also about at the ashram and her mother and with her husband, you know, the sweat, the body, and there's a lot of this which I found was quite very, it was interesting as well.
Yeah. I was also thinking that, you know, bringing up what I think, I don't know who was it, the whole notion of girl in white cotton. We are never quite certain who is this girl in white cotton. Is it Tara? Is it Antara? Or is it that Jain and auntie or grand auntie of Dilip, who chose white cotton as a sign of asceticism. So you're never quite certain in the novel who exactly is this girl in white cotton, you know? And uh, and I was wondering if any of you all had anything to say about the epigraph. Does the wound of the daughter turn into something else if left unattended? Does the wound of the daughter turn into something else if left unattended? By Lydia Yuknavich. Would we be able to see the novel as a wound in that sense? You know, the novel as a wound which, you know, cannot get healed. And even the arrival of another daughter, still, is it going to replicate the same story again? You know?
C'est pas très important qu'on ait, non. Au fond, c'est pas la peine que je
Yes, just thinking that that's one way perhaps that we can think of this novel as a wound. Yeah.
Moi, ça m'intéresse pas du tout. Non. Ça, je veux dire, toutes ces psychologies. Non, non, parce que ça ne... Non, c'était bien, ça en était la répétition, le va-et-vient, parce que il y a...
This is very interesting description also on page 57 about the white color. This is, to my mother, this was the color of her community and I knew better. The white clothes were the one that separated us from our family, our friends, and everyone else, and always made my life in them a kind of prison. So while the external color is white, there is an interiority to white, which brings out all these other emotions that are taking place between the relationship between the two. And also it's interesting the way the European title of the book is Burnt Sugar. It also looks at the very acrimonious relationship between the mother and daughter. So at one level, it looks at interiority through the white exterior. And at other level, it kind of festers the wound, you know, like you said.
Yeah. It's like bittersweet.
Yes, yes. It's caramel at the same time it's burnt, you know?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you for the clue for the translation of the French title. Because Burnt Sugar has got to find his explanation somehow along the translating of the novel.
Yeah.
Burnt Sugar is also caramel, isn't it?
Yes, it is caramel.
Burnt caramel.
And also across the novel, the notion of white cotton is tied to asceticism. You know, white is the color of the ashram. White is the color of taking a Jain Diksha and becoming a nun, a Jain nun.
Obstinance.
And yet, white is also the color that marks violence on women and also self-inflicted violence as well. And I'm thinking of two related moments separated by time. One is the time when Dilip's grand aunt literally pulls her hair, plucks her hair off her head to turn bald in the manner of a Jain nun. And the second is when Antara pulls out all the hair from her eyebrows at a particular time in her sleep. So this idea of a violence, a self-inflicted violence, is something that one needs to perhaps also think about. It's not always violence that is imposed upon you from outside, but there's a way in which the outside, the boundaries between violence outside and violence inside gets blurred. So there's a kind of seamless break between, you know, the outside and inside. I think one of the trajectories that Avni Doshi treads very carefully, it's a tightrope, is the tightrope between outside and inside. You know, there are, and what she does is to kind of propose multiple kinds of insight. So you have inside a city, you have inside a home, inside your mind, inside a relationship. So you know, the novel opens to a kind of a range of insights which kind of crisscross in a kind of rhizomatic structure, you know. And all the time kind of engaging with multiple outsides as well. So I thought that would be a...
Yeah. You have opened up so many new ways of looking at the novel, and you know, the characters within the novel. It's really been amazing. Anybody would like to comment? Some of us have not. Is Dr. Siona not there? Supala, would you like to
No,
speak?
I don't think. She must have come home late.
Okay, because I saw her walk in.
She has not joined. No, we stay close, but I haven't met her today.
Okay. Any other comments?
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
You know, when I read this book, I had this feeling of it, and I might not be very politically correct in this group, but when I read this book, I felt this detachment that she has. You know, having myself lived through having a mother with Alzheimer's, I felt. I mean, if you look at Jerry Pinto's book on his mother, I'm in the Big Home, it's a very experienced pain, you know. And for me, this book, it's a very intellectual book where you play with the idea. But to me, what Jerry puts into M and the Big Home is not here. I find it a an intellectual kind of book where the hostility and the irritation and pain is not quite.
It's cold-blooded in a sense, yeah.
Yeah, it's not really felt. It's imagined, and so for me, there's something that's lacking. And I really hope people don't go through that whole experience. It's a dreadful experience, but when I read this book, it's kind of it's not real to me.
That's an interesting point of view, you know. uh, yeah, I think in M and the Big Whom, you're talking about that, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
So that's an extraordinary book. But I think there's a big, like, structural difference between M and the Big Home and Girl in White Cotton. And I feel the difference is that Jerry, as a boy, is living through his mother's experience with madness. Whereas in this book, there is both a physical and an emotional distance already in place, where when the mother is falling into dementia. So the book is, I think, relentlessly distant. It puts a relentless distance between the mother and daughter. And it intellectualizes that distance almost as a way of uh, stopping herself from saying either I hate you or I love you. It, it is a way of refusing the. I think you're very perceptive in what is saying about the intellectual quality of the descriptions and so on. You're like, I feel spot on. But I think that intellectual quality has a function in this book. And the function is to displace a direct expression of emotion, you know. And I think the intimacy and the tenderness which you find in M and the Big Room, that's so remarkable, so remarkable. But I think this book is doing something else, and it is uh, not telling us about the troubles of being a caretaker. It's about the impossibility of saying, I hate my mother. How do you even say it? How do you say it? You can't say it. And the book is an evidence of how you can't say it.
In fact, when I was reading the book, there's a relationship between Antara and her Nani. And I find the same kind of acrid display of emotions, when talking about mother-daughter relationship. Nani says, you have to take off her gold, otherwise when, if she dies, it'll be difficult to get off the bangles. And another time, when she comes back from the ashram, they're forcing her, you go back to your husband's place. There's no place for you here. So that kind of, what should I say? That kind of acidity in all the relationships that bind the women into a bonded family structure, seemingly very traditional. If you look at Nani, she's always sitting on the floor and doing some traditional domestic work, or she also has a relationship with her husband which has, they're distant, but at the same time they're bonded together. So it within the feminine sphere, it brings out all these range of relationships which we understand as women bonded together. But there are also those other emotions that separate us from each other, which kind of, spread tentacles of division, jealousy, this, that. That's also there. And I think in a very cold-blooded fashion, she brings this out. And it's shocking at one range because they are not accepted emotions. I mean, Jerry's emotions, which he expresses towards his mother, of fear of a mother figure, the sense of total abandonment, coming home and finding the bathroom smelling of blood. And at the same time, his whole attempt to save himself and save his mother is very touching. But, and the entire relationship with the family also, the Big Home and the M, the relationship where, everything sours, but a Big Home plays the big rock, in the relationship. and M talking about sexuality to her son in a way that is not talked of at all, which is shocking. But at the same time, this whole conditioning of a boy, this whole fears of a boy, like when he grows up at his first birthday, he goes to a psychiatrist and he says, will I be normal? This is very, very touching. But here there is a kind of scheme of things where relationships will be played out, but under this relationships will be this whole patina of other things that will also happen alongside. Probably seemingly they won't come to the fore, but it's also there, and she kind of ruthlessly takes it out. So the girl in white cotton has also different colors inside, which she exposes.
Yeah. True.
Excuse me, comment.
Yes, unmute her. Sufala Rao.
But Avni has brought out her relation, like her Indian background and American background beautifully, telling about the relationship with mother-daughter relationship. That she has done very nicely.
Very true.
And it is such a natural thing to happen. There are so many people who have a lot of differences when they grow up. Right?
Yeah, on
I
that
agree.
note,
I agree.
I think I stopped recording. This has been such a wonderful experience, and I thank